The Rue de l'Homme Armé. Part 1. What are the convulsions of a city compared with the emeute of the soul? Man is a still deeper depth than the people. But Jean Valjean at that very moment was a prey to a frightful uprising. All the gulfs were reopened within him. He also, like Paris, was shuddering on the threshold of a formidable and obscure revolution. A few hours had sufficed. His destiny and his conscience were suddenly covered with shadow. Of him also, as of Paris, we might say, the two principles are face to face. The angel of light and the angel of darkness are to wrestle on the bridge of the abyss. Which of the two shall hurl down the other? Which shall sweep him away? On the eve of that same day, June 5th, Jean Valjean, accompanied by Cosette and Toussaint, had installed himself in the Rue de l'Homme Armé. A sudden turn of fortune awaited him there. Cosette had not left the Rue Plumet without an attempt at resistance. For the first time since they had lived together, Cosette's will and Jean Valjean's will had shown themselves distinct, and had been, if not conflicting, at least contradictory. There was objection on one side and inflexibility on the other. The abrupt advice "remove," thrown to Jean Valjean by an unknown hand, had so far alarmed him as to render him absolute. He believed himself tracked out and pursued. Cosette had to yield. In this departure from the Rue Plumet, which was almost a flight, Jean Valjean carried nothing but the little embalmed valise christened by Cosette the Inseparable. Full trunks would have required porters, and porters are witnesses. They had a coach come to the door on the Rue Babylone, and they went away. They arrived in the Rue de l'Homme Armé after nightfall. They went silently to bed. We are reassured almost as foolishly as we are alarmed. Human nature is so constituted. Hardly was Jean Valjean in the Rue de l'Homme Armé before his anxiety grew less, and by degrees was dissipated. By what means could anybody find him there? His first care was to place the Inseparable by his side. He slept well. Night counsels, we might add, night calms. Next morning he awoke almost cheerful. As for Cosette, she had Toussaint bring a bowl of soup to her room, and did not make her appearance till evening. About 5 o'clock, Toussaint, who was coming and going very busy with this little removal, set a cold fowl on the dining-room table, which Cosette, out of deference to her father, consented to look at. This done, Cosette, upon some pretext of a severe headache, said good night to Jean Valjean, and shut herself in her bedroom. Jean Valjean ate a chicken's wing with good appetite, and leaning on the table, clearing his brow little by little, was regaining his sense of security. While he was making this frugal dinner, he became confusedly aware, on 2 or 3 occasions, of the stammering of Toussaint, who said to him, "Monsieur, there is a row. They are fighting in Paris." But, absorbed in a multitude of interior combinations, he paid no attention to it. To tell the truth, he had not heard. He arose, and began to walk from the window to the door, and from the door to the window, growing calmer and calmer. With calmness, Cosette, his single engrossing care, returned to his thoughts. Cosette sufficed for his happiness. The idea that perhaps he did not suffice for Cosette's happiness, this idea, once his fever and his bane, did not even present itself to his mind. He arranged in his own mind, and with every possible facility, the departure for England with Cosette, and he saw his happiness reconstructed, no matter where, in the perspective of his reverie. While yet walking up and down, with slow steps, his eyes suddenly met something strange. He perceived facing him, in the inclined mirror which hung above the sideboard, and he distinctly read the lines which follow: "My beloved, alas! My father wishes to start immediately. We shall be tonight in the Rue de l'Homme Armé, No. 7. In a week we shall be in London. Cosette, June 4th." Jean Valjean stood aghast. Cosette, on arriving, had laid her blotter on the sideboard before the mirror, and wholly absorbed in her sorrowful anguish had forgotten it there. The mirror reflected the writing. There resulted what is called in geometry the symmetrical image, so that the writing reversed on the blotter was corrected by the mirror and presented its original form, and Jean Valjean had beneath his eyes the letter written that evening by Cosette to Marius. It was simple and withering. Jean Valjean went to the mirror. He read the 5 lines again, but he did not believe it. They produced upon him the effect of an apparition in a flash of lightning. It was a hallucination. It was impossible. It was not. Little by little his perception became more precise. He looked at Cosette's blotter, and the consciousness of the real fact returned to him. He took the blotter and said, "It comes from that." Jean Valjean tottered, let the blotter fall, and sank down into the old armchair by the sideboard, his head drooping, his eyes glassy, bewildered. He said to himself that it was clear, and that the light of the world were forever eclipsed, and that Cosette had written that to somebody. Then he heard his soul again become terrible, give a sullen roar in the darkness. Go then, take the lion from the dog, which he has in his cage. Of all the tortures which he had undergone in that inquisition of destiny, this was the most fearful. Never had such pincers seized him. He felt the mysterious quiver of every latent sensibility. He felt the laceration of the unknown fibre. Alas, the supreme ordeal, let us say rather, the only ordeal, is the loss of the beloved being. Poor old Jean Valjean did not, certainly, love Cosette, otherwise than as a father. But as we have already mentioned, into this paternity, the very bereavement of his life had introduced every love. He loved Cosette as his daughter, and he loved her as his mother, and he loved her as his sister, and as he had never had either sweetheart or wife, as nature is a creditor who accepts no protest, that sentiment also, the most indestructible of all, was mingled with the others. Vague, ignorant, pure with all the purity of blindness, unconscious, celestial, angelic, divine. Less like a sentiment than like an instinct, less like an instinct than like an attraction, imperceptible and invisible, but real. Love, properly speaking, existed in his enormous tenderness for Cosette, as does the vein of gold in the mountain, dark and virgin. So, when he saw that it was positively ended, that she escaped him, that she glided from his hands, that she eluded him, that it was cloud, that it was water, when he had before his eyes this crushing evidence, another is the aim of her heart, another is the desire of her life, there is a beloved, I am only the father, I no longer exist. When he could no more doubt, when he said to himself, she is going away out of me, the grief which he felt surpassed the possible. To have done all that he had done, to come to this, and what, to be nothing? Then, as we have just said, he felt from his head to foot a shudder of revolt. He felt even to the roots of his hair the immense awakening of selfishness, and the me howled in the abyss of his soul. His instinct did not hesitate. He put together certain circumstances, certain dates, certain blushes, and certain pallors of Cosette, and he said to himself, "It is he." He perceived distinctly, at the bottom of the implacable evocation of memory, the unknown prowler of the Luxembourg, that wretched seeker of amours, that romantic idler, that imbecile, that coward, for it is cowardice to come and make sweet eyes at girls who are beside their father who loves them. After he had fully determined that that young man was at the bottom of this state of affairs, and that it all came from him, he, Jean Valjean, the regenerated man, the man who had laboured so much upon his soul, the man who had made so many efforts to resolve all life, all misery, and all misfortune into love, he looked within himself, and there he saw a spectre, hatred. While he was thinking, Toussaint entered. Jean Valjean arose and asked her, "In what direction is it? Do you know?" Toussaint, astonished, could only answer, "If you please." Jean Valjean resumed, "Didn't you tell me just now that they were fighting?" "Oh, yes, monsieur," answered Toussaint. "It is over by Saint Mary." There are some mechanical impulses which come to us, without our knowledge even, from our deepest thoughts. It was doubtless under the influence of an impulse of this kind, and of which he was hardly conscious, that Jean Valjean 5 minutes afterward found himself in the street. He was bareheaded, seated upon the stone block by the door of his house. He seemed to be listening. The night had come. Part 2. How much time did he pass thus? What were the ebbs and the flows of that tragic meditation? Did he straighten up? Did he remain bowed? Had he been bent so far as to break? Could he yet straighten himself and regain a foothold in his conscience upon something solid? He himself probably could not have told. Suddenly he raised his eyes. Somebody was walking in the street. He heard steps near him. He looked, and by the light of the lamp, in the direction of the archives, he perceived a livid face, young and radiant. Gavroche had just arrived in the Rue de l'Arme. Gavroche was looking in the air, and appeared to be searching for something. He saw Jean Valjean perfectly, but he took no notice of him. Jean Valjean, who, the instant before, in the state of mind in which he was, would not have spoken nor even replied to anybody, felt irresistibly impelled to address a word to this child. "Small boy," said he, "what is the matter with you?" "The matter is that I'm hungry," answered Gavroche tartly, and he added, "Small yourself." Jean Valjean felt in his pocket and took out a 5-franc piece. But Gavroche, who was of the wagtail species, and who passed quickly from one action to another, had picked up a stone. He had noticed a lamp. "Hold on," said he. "You have your lamps here still. You're not regular, my friends. It's disorderly. Break me that." And he threw the stone into the lamp, the glass from which fell with such a clatter that some bourgeois, hid behind the curtains in the opposite house, cried, "There is 83." The lamp swung violently and went out. The street became suddenly dark. Jean Valjean approached Gavroche. "Poor creature," said he, in an undertone, and speaking to himself. "He is hungry." And he put the 100-sou piece into his hand. Gavroche felt softened. Besides, he had just noticed that the man who was talking to him had no hat, and that inspired him with confidence. "Really," said he, "it isn't to prevent my breaking the lamps?" "Break all you like." "You're a fine fellow," said Gavroche, and he put the 5-franc piece into one of his pockets. His confidence increasing, he added, "Do you belong in the street?" "Yes. Why?" "Could you show me number 7? "What do you want with number 7? Here the boy stopped. He feared that he had said too much. He plunged his nails vigorously into his hair and merely answered, "Oh, that's it." An idea flashed across Jean Valjean's mind. Anguish has such lucidity. He said to the child, "Have you brought the letter I am waiting for?" "You?" said Gavroche. "You're not a woman." "The letter is for Mademoiselle Cosette, isn't it?" "Cosette?" muttered Gavroche. "Yeah, I believe it was that funny name." "Well," resumed Jean Valjean, "I am to deliver the letter to her. Give it to me." "In that case, you must know that I'm sent from the barricade." "Of course," said Jean Valjean. Gavroche thrust his hand into another of his pockets and drew out a folded paper. Then he gave a military salute. "Respect for the dispatch," said he. "It comes from the provisional government." And he handed the paper to Jean Valjean. "And hurry yourself, Monsieur What's-your-name, for Mademoiselle What's-her-name is waiting." Gavroche was proud of having produced this word. Jean Valjean asked, "Is it to Saint Mary that the answer is to be sent?" "In that case," exclaimed Gavroche, "you'll make one of them cakes vulgarly called blunders. The letter comes from the barricade in the Rue de la Chanvrerie, and I'm going back there. Good night, citizen." This said, Gavroche went away, or rather, resumed his flight like an escaped bird, towards the spot whence he came. He replunged into the obscurity as if he made a hole in it, with the rapidity and precision of a projectile. The little Rue de l'Homme Armé again became silent and solitary. In a twinkling this strange child, who had within him shadow and dream, was buried in the dusk of those rows of black houses, and was lost therein like smoke in the darkness. One might have thought him dissipated and vanished, if, a few minutes after his disappearance, a loud crashing of glass, and the splendid patatras of a lamp falling upon the pavement, had not abruptly reawakened the indigent bourgeois. It was Gavroche passing along the Rue de Chaume. Part 3. Jean Valjean went in with Marius' letter. He groped his way upstairs, pleased with the darkness, like an owl which holds its prey, opened and softly closed the door, listened to see if he heard any sound, decided that, according to all appearances, Cosette and Toussaint were asleep, and plunged 3 or 4 matches into the bottle of the fumé tinder-box before he could raise a spark. His hand trembled so much, there was theft in what he was about to do. At last his candle was lighted. He leaned his elbows on the table, unfolded the paper, and read. In Marius' note to Cosette, Jean Valjean saw only these words: "I die. When you read this, my soul will be near you." Before these 2 lines, he was horribly dazzled. He sat a moment as if crushed by the change of emotion which was wrought within him. He looked at Marius' note with a sort of drunken astonishment. He had before his eyes that splendor, the death of the hated being. He uttered a hideous cry of inward joy. So it was finished. The end came sooner than he had dared to hope. The being who encumbered his destiny was disappearing. He was going away of himself, freely, of his own accord, without any intervention on his, Jean Valjean's part, without any fault of his. That man was about to die. Jean Valjean felt that he was delivered. He would then find himself once more alone with Cosette. Rivalry ceased, the future recommenced. He had only to keep the note in his pocket. Cosette would never know what had become of that man. I only have to let things take their course. That man cannot escape. If he is not dead yet, it is certain that he will die. What happiness! All this said within himself, he became gloomy. Then he went down and waked the porter. About an hour afterward, Jean Valjean went out in the full dress of a National Guard and armed. The porter had easily found in the neighborhood what was necessary to complete his equipment. He had a loaded musket and a cartridge box full of cartridges. He went in the direction of the markets.